Welcome to the CBIA BizCast. I'm your host, Ali Warshavsky, and today on our podcast, we're speaking with Colin Cooper, who is retiring from being the state's first Chief Manufacturing Officer. We're going to look back at his time in that role and also look ahead to see what's next for Colin. He's been a guest on this podcast quite a few times. We're happy to have him back. Welcome back to the podcast.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And good afternoon to you.
Well, and now that you're retiring from this position, something that a few of us were wondering at CBIA is, if you knew what you know now when you started, what would you do differently?
I think that if I were starting all over again, I would push for some more resources for this office up front. I frequently would talk to people and they'd say, well, I'll talk to somebody in your on your staff or in your department. I said, I'm a department of one. So I think, getting some, perhaps some administrative help up front would be, some dedicated administrative help up front would help leverage the time here in this and maybe, cover some more ground and maybe focus more on strategic issues. There's a lot of time that's consumed just sort of on tactical and administrative issues.
So building a little bit more of a team. And of course, you were the first one. So you really were the guinea pig here. And you took this position right before COVID, correct? How did that impact your role, or what you think your role would have been if we were in a public health emergency right now?
It impacted everybody's role everywhere, right? I mean, we're all doing things that we never imagined that we'd be doing, 2 years ago. But it had a significant impact on this position. I started in November, really started in November of 2019, and I was really focused on getting out into the manufacturing community, speaking with business leaders, and trying to understand what their headwind issues were. I certainly had my list of issues from 20 years of running and growing a manufacturing business in Connecticut, but I wanted to see if there was a consensus amongst other business leaders, and that would sort of help me prioritize my time and efforts. And clearly there was. It became clear right off the bat that the top issue was workforce development, access to a skilled labor force. And so I was probably 3 months into it, and then the world changed. And I remember being in some meetings, talking to some companies with some operations around the globe, particularly in Asia, and really getting a much better sense of what was happening over in China with the pandemic. And we were, and talking with people back here, my sense was that people were a little deer in the headlights. People, we didn't quite know or fully appreciate what was coming at us and how it was going to impact us. So I actually reached out to the folks at Pratt & Whitney, who have operations in China, and they also have operations out in Seattle, which is where it first landed here in North America. And they had been dealing with COVID in those regions for a month at that time. They're also a very large, sophisticated company, and I knew that they would have already sort of mobilized an action plan, and reached out to them and asked if they would address. We weren't doing full-blown Teams meetings or WebExes at that time, or Zoom calls, but we set up, with the help of the folks at CBIA, a conference call where we had well over, I think, 250 Connecticut manufacturers on the call. And then Pratt really talked about their experiences, and more importantly, sort of went through a checklist that they had developed on policies and procedures that they had implemented in their operations that had been impacted by the pandemic. So then quickly thereafter, I started working with Connecticut manufacturers who were working to develop and implement safe workplace policies and procedures. And that really became all consuming as we got into sort of the middle of March and the latter part of March. And there was a tremendous amount of sharing of ideas and best practices, and sort of shamelessly adopting other companies' policies and procedures. And so we work to sort of consolidate those and standardize on best practices and get that out to the Connecticut manufacturers, who were very quick to develop and implement those safe workplace procedures. So much so that the governor was confident when we were, this was all uncharted territory. So, as the pandemic is sort of washing over the state, we're trying to decide, what businesses should stay open, what businesses should close, the ones that are open, what are the rules of engagement, how can we operate to make sure we keep the public and the workforce is safe. I think the Connecticut manufacturers did a really good job of developing and implementing safe workplace procedures, so much so that the governor felt confident deeming all of manufacturing in Connecticut as an essential industry sector, and allowing all of our manufacturers to continue to operate as the pandemic washed over us. And I think his confidence was rewarded, that the Connecticut manufacturing employers did a really good job of ensuring the health and safety of their workers as they continued to operate as the world was sort of melting down around us. So really went from a position where I was sort of gathering information and trying to set an agenda for looking forward for a couple of years, to a role where it was really sort of reactive, and again a lot of new policies, procedures, roles were developed out of whole cloth. There wasn't a playbook to pull off the shelf. We hadn't had a pandemic in 100 years, and none of us were around for the last one. So it was interesting. And then, of course, we morphed from there into really working with our manufacturers. It became apparent, obviously, to everyone very early on that we had a critical shortage of certain medical equipment and supplies. Most notably, people understand the issues with personal protective equipment, but also there were shortages of components that were needed for ventilators and x-ray machines and the like. We started working first with the state to help them procure what they needed to, through sort of more traditional sourcing channels. And then we worked with Connecticut manufacturers who had the capacity and the capability to pivot, to use their capabilities to make products that they historically didn't make, to help address some of these critical shortages. So again, very fast paced and very reactive to a rapidly changing environment.
And do you think that part of the difference to it of being more reactive is going from private to public sector? How did that differ for you? Because you had spent your life in the private sector, then you're thrown into the public sector. Pandemic aside, how would it have been different?
Well, I mean, I don't think the proactive versus reactive is different, necessarily a function of the private sector versus the public sector. I think it's more of a function. I think it was Mike Tyson who said, you go into a fight with a strategy and then you get punched in the nose, and we got punched in the nose and really had to react to a different set of circumstances than any of us had dealt with before. So I think that was really what drove the reactive. But people were great. I mean, it was amazing. Again, when the state was having problems, securing PPE through sort of more traditional channels. Again, we reached out to some of the multinational companies in Connecticut, most notably Raytheon Technologies, who had operations we knew in Asia. We needed some boots in the ground over there because everybody was going upstream of everybody else to grab it. Just a food fight trying to get access to this. But we knew they had boots in the ground over there. They worked with us. They sent people out to the actual factories where these medical equipment and supplies were being made, and really sort of got to the front of the queue. And then so much so that they also arranged for export and transportation, and ultimately I think something on the order of $3 million worth of critically needed PP&E they ended up paying for themselves and donating it to the state. And so that's a very large example of what some of the things that Connecticut manufacturers did to help out. But there are scores of other stories of companies, again, pivoting to address urgently needed supplies and equipment. There I could do a whole podcast on them, but we we saw some extraordinary efforts on people's parts. It's just not that easy if you have a business that you've sort of aligned for years to make certain products with certain capabilities, and then just to turn on a dime and make something different. But people were it sounds a little cliche, but almost heroic in uh, their efforts and their outcomes.
No, they definitely were. Like you said, if you're used to making something for 50 years and all of a sudden you're tasked with making masks or other PPE, it's not easy. And to do it almost overnight was something that I think a lot of Connecticut residents were amazed and proud and very happy they could do. I'm sure that's probably one of the most interesting things you saw in your job is that pivot, which was a completely unplanned. But what did you like most about your role as chief manufacturing officer?
I think there are two components. One is the outreach. I love visiting companies. I call it industrial tourism. The best part of this job is the fact that I get access to these different companies. I get to see the businesses, see the operation, meet with the business leaders, and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you're in situ there, looking at the operations. To me, it's fascinating. I learn something every time I go into a facility and see what's going on. Very much enjoyed the ability to meet people that I wouldn't have met sort of in my past life as an owner and executive at an aerospace business. It's just there are some fantastic people. Getting to know the governor, he's such a personable person, just with a ton of common sense and smarts, business smarts. And then the people that he's brought in, dealing with people like David Lehman, who's so capable, Josh Jabal, who's the state chief operating officer, working with Garrett Moran, who was the initial chairman of the governor's workforce council. Just really getting to meet some just excellent people. And then obviously meeting all these business leaders along the way, scores of them, and then really getting an opportunity to talk with them and understand sort of how they view things and why they do what they do. It just tremendous amount. It's like drinking from a fire hose. It quenches your thirst, but it's a bit overwhelming at times. But it's to me that those are the best aspects of this job.
And when you were touring the state, if you could pick one thing, what do you think is the coolest thing that you saw being manufactured in Connecticut?
Boy, I saw a lot of cool things. I think that for me, with an aerospace background, and aerospace tends to be sort of high complexity, low volume work. Going in to see the Kleenex facility, Kimberly-Clark's facility out in New Milford, which is the northwest part of the state, and seeing the scale of that operation, the fact that they're shipping 1 million packages of Kleenex a day and supplying all the needs east of the Mississippi, and the scale and the investment in the operations that they have there, or going down to Edgewell in Milford, better known as Schick, where they make Schick razors.
Mm-hmm.
And just again, seeing the process they use to make those. I mean, that is the United States' largest razor factory, and you're seeing the process of making the blades, and how leaned out that is, and how sophisticated that is. But then also the injection molding portion of it, and the robotics that they have, again, and the volume scale of what they do there. That to me was, I really enjoyed seeing that. But I would have to say, being an aerospace geek, I think the coolest thing we make in the state, I mean, we make a lot of cool things, helicopters, subs, a lot of different things. But jet engines to me is, I think it's the best. It's the coolest thing that I've seen.
What about something that maybe people don't realize is manufactured in Connecticut?
There are so many companies that I've been to that I'd never heard of before, and I spent my life in manufacturing. We have a lot of supply chain companies, so these are not companies that are selling something under their uh, uh, brand name. They're making components or products for larger manufacturers. Maybe they're selling into Medtronics, or they're selling into Pratt or into one of the automotive OEMs. You go into these facilities. When I was younger, I grew up in New Britain, Connecticut, which was at the time called the hardware capital of the world. And you would go downtown New Britain, you'd see these big, large, monolithic brick buildings, Stanley Works, Fafner Bearings, the Britain Machine Tools, and the like. And it was sort of front of mind. You couldn't miss it. It was right there. Manufacturing has sort of morphed into more. Um, uh, a lot of large companies use very sophisticated supply chains, and so they have a cohort of smaller specialty suppliers that are really good at what they do. And these businesses tend to be in light industrial parks, light manufacturing out in the suburbs or the outskirts at on some road that's a cul-de-sac that doesn't go anywhere. And you'd never be going there unless you're going to visit that company. And you go to visit the company and you walk through the doors and you say, oh my God, these guys are making $12 million pieces of equipment and shipping them to Sweden and Germany. And again, people living a quarter mile away don't even know the company's there. And they're a world leader in what they produce. So I would say on a regular basis, I go in and see businesses where I'm just sort of blown away by what they're doing and how they're doing it there.
And how are these manufacturers managing the labor shortage? And what do you think the state has to continue to do to help them succeed in something like we're going through, where not only is there a labor shortage, there are supply chain issues too?
Well, I think, I mean, you're right. I mean, again, back to sort of, when I started, top issue was access to a skilled workforce, workforce development. And so a lot has transpired in the last 2 years on that front. The governor had the governor's workforce council. Out of that came the workforce, Connecticut Workforce Strategic Plan, which is a great plan. It's got great initiatives and it's actionable. And then they convened the Office of Workforce Strategy. I headed it up with Dr. Kelly Valeries, who's wonderful, and she and her team are really charged with implementing that strategy. There's a lot going on that front. But if you sort of reduce it to its most basic components, I think first we need to get the word out. And all of us in manufacturing are always out there proselytizing. It's not dark, dirty, dull, dangerous. It's clean, lean, and green. And certainly every group I get in front of, and I get in front of a lot of chambers of commerce and manufacturing associations and educational groups, I'm always proselytizing that it's not manufacturing isn't what people picture it from a generation or two ago. And the fact that it not only is the environment, these bright, clean, well organized, well lit facilities full of millions of dollars of computerized equipment, but they empower their workers. They're looking for workers' input on how better to run the business. In the focus of sort of continuous improvement, you need the people who know the work the best to be in the game, but also the fact that educating people that manufacturing provides more than good jobs. It provides great careers for a spectrum of different. I mean, manufacturing hires people all the way from high school graduates through PhDs, and they're varied career opportunities once you get into a manufacturing company. So first is get the word out, get that awareness of these opportunities. And then I think the secondly is, we have to identify sort of historically underutilized pools of talent. And then we have to make sure that talent has access to the training required to allow them to smoothly enter into the manufacturing workforce. And again, there's a lot going on in the Office of Workforce Strategy in terms of trying to get people access to that training, get them trained, and then into the workforce. But manufacturing business leaders need to get in the game. They get it now. It's such a critical issue. People are rolling up their sleeves. You can't run the old past patterns. You gotta go upstream. You got to get engaged with the schools and the educators. You got to get engaged with the parents to help get the word out and to get these kids access to the manufacturing environment, and then help them get training get them into the workforce, and then also get them trained up once they're in the workforce. So, you know, everybody's got, there are a lot of different stakeholders who have a role to play. And there's no shortage. There's no shortage of opportunity. It's just making sure that people understand the career opportunities in manufacturing, and that they have access to the training and can get into the manufacturing workforce.
In CBIA, we're working on our 2022 policies, priorities, that is, policy priorities. And I know one of them is to put more funding towards workforce development to hopefully eventually come to a solution for these labor issues. But I know it's going to be a couple of years before we can really solve everything with COVID going on. Now, you are about to step down from your role. So want to give you the opportunity to tell us, what do you think your biggest accomplishment was while you were in this role?
I'm hopeful that the one that's going to have the biggest impact is in my role as the board chair for the Manufacturing Innovation Fund. Working with the board there, we developed half a dozen new initiatives that collectively I think are really going to move the needle for our manufacturing sector. So those initiatives include a new program to help facilitate companies bringing on engineering interns. We educate a lot of interns in the state. Excuse me. We educate a lot of engineers in the state. We want to increase the yield of those that stay in the state to begin their career. So we've got a program that's going to be coming online to help our small, mid-sized manufacturers bring engineering interns on, and then hopefully cement those bonds with those students so that they can continue their career there after graduation. We have an initiative that's going to help companies get access to an analysis called the Smart Industry Readiness Index that's going to sort of measure the businesses in terms of their adoption of digital technologies and identify specific areas for their businesses where they would be well served, focusing their efforts to bring on digital technology, also known as Industry 4.0 technologies, and really provide them with a roadmap to do so. And we've got some other initiatives in the state, a number of initiatives around digital transformation going on right now. We're going to be putting online a program to match Connecticut innovators with Connecticut manufacturers, because our feeling is if it's invented here in Connecticut, we want to make it here in Connecticut. We have a program, I call it the Hearts and Minds Advertising Campaign, again, to get the word out for folks that they understand the career opportunities in manufacturing, and that they also understand a young person beginning their career in manufacturing doesn't mean that they are ending their educational career. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A lot of manufacturing business leaders, and we did this at our company too, if you had a high potential early career employee, frequently we would underwrite the cost of them getting their either undergraduate or graduate degree in some sort of technical capacity. We're developing a manufacturing website so that manufacturers can access the myriad of different programs that are available out there. I talk with people and I meet Joe Ercolano from the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. He says, "Oh, we're Connecticut's best kept secret." Well, we don't want to have any best kept secrets. We got too many best kept secrets. There are literally scores of programs that are available, whether it's for help in environmental or access to capital or exporting, just hiring, training, whatever it is. a program doesn't do any good if people don't know about it. And so we want to make sure that it's that our 4,000 manufacturers in the state have access to those programs, understand what they are, and they can access them. And then we're also have a program where we're going to be helping underwrite the cost of regional career fairs. This is part of the outreach, so again, students understand that really the varied, the different careers and rewarding careers that are available to them in manufacturing. So I think if you're going to take one thing, I think that package of new initiatives, I'm hopeful it's going to touch on a lot of areas that are really important to our manufacturers in the state.
And I have two last questions for you. One, what would be the advice you give to your successor to get a lot of sleep before March? What are you going to tell them?
I think I would tell them, try to make sure that you get as many resources as you can. And again, I can certainly help my successor with that. I've developed a lot of relationships. A lot of what I do is through the relationships with people like CBIA, with Constep, with CCAT, and obviously people at DECD I work very closely with, and so really getting things done through other people. But I would say, try to get the resources you can. The other thing I would say is, and this is a piece of advice that I got from somebody that I worked with who had worked at a larger company and had rotated through a number of different divisions, and they said, get out and meet people early. And I think that aligns with, in my sort of analogous to that, I used to say when I was in the private sector, in our business, we did a lot of acquisitions and really needed financing to do that. And I always felt that you never wanted to go to a bank to ask for money. The first time you meet them is when you're asking them for money. So develop those relationships ahead of time. You're going to need people. Early in my tenure at the state, I reached out to people like Miguel Cardona, who's another person I got to meet. It's just a superstar at DOE. Katie Dykes and her team at Deep, to Mark Ojakian, to Kurt Westby at DOL, reached out to those folks because I knew I was going to be working with them to develop that relationship, so that my first call to them wasn't when I was looking for something. Yeah. So I think this is very much a relationship position. Again, because you need to rely on the other agencies and their resources to get things done.
Some great advice. So hopefully that person is listening. If not, we'll forward this along to them when they officially take office. But my last question is, what is next for Colin Cooper? I see you on a beach somewhere.
I've never been much of a beach person, although it does have its appeal, especially the weather we've been having recently. There's a lot of things I'm going to be doing, sort of the cliche, some traveling and working on things like my tennis game and golf game, both of which need a lot of work. But I'm going to stay active. I'm going to remain on the Manufacturing Innovation Fund board. I'm going to remain on the ACM board. Those are two organizations that are important to me. I'm on the board of 4 different companies in Connecticut. I have ownership positions in a number of them, so I'll stay engaged there. And then I have a sort of a number of other things that I'm thinking of. I have somebody who used to work for me who's looking to buy a business, and I have a lot of experience doing that, so may help them out there. I'm not worried about filling my day. My business partner, who I was worked with for 20 years in aerospace, has been retired for 2 years. He's been tormenting me from the top of ski mountains and lush green fairways around the country. So he seems to be able to fill his time, and I'm optimistic I'll be able to fill mine.
I think you're going to be okay. I think some of the best meetings, if I've learned from Chris, is they happen on the golf course. So,
well, my problem is I'm in the woods so much that there's not a lot of time to chit chat. So maybe if I bring my game up a few notches, then that'll be a good venue for me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for listening to this week's BizCast. You can listen and subscribe on YouTube, Apple, or SoundCloud. And for more episodes, visit CBIA.com.